In this video, I'm going to talk about the importance of using the ARP table information to associate the MAC address with the IP addresses. Most switches do not contain IP addresses. They simply track layer 2 information, MAC addresses. Some switches like core routers like the Cisco 6509 series do track both MAC and IP addresses, but most switches you're going to find have very few IP addresses in them. Since switches typically only track MAC addresses, we need to find the IP addresses, and we do that by building what we call a combined ARP table, and that's shown right here. We gather ARP information from many different sources. First of all, your switch. Second of all, your local ARP table in your computer. And thirdly, using PingSuite. In this case, we're on a small Class C type network, and it only has 254 devices in it, and so it pre-fills the PingSuite list with that range. Now, if you were on a larger network like a 10 dot network, this range could be quite large, so you want to adjust it to match what you really have as far as IP addresses, what you're really using. And then, if you have more than one VLAN, you may want to add the IP addresses of the other VLANs in here. At least when you ping them, it will pre-fill the ARP tables of other devices. That comes down to this situation right here, other devices. This tool can query two different SNMP enabled devices for their ARP tables. You can enter that information right here, SNMP 1, 2, or 3. So you put the IP address in and the access credentials, and we will query that device for its ARP table. When you're selecting these two devices to query with SNMP, you need to decide how important they are and where they are on your network. Some devices won't give you very much information, but you could put in a core router, like I said, a 6509, or you could put in possibly a printer that's shared, or a different router. But you need to decide where they are on the network because they need to have visibility into what the switch is giving you. Another thing you need to decide is how fast it's going to transfer information. We use at least SNMP version 2C or version 3, and at that point you can use the bulk transfer methods. That brings over more records faster. And then speaking of more records, you need to decide how many records you're going to limit coming from that device. Some devices have a lot. We've run into some customers who had over 8,000 records coming back from their ARP tables of their core routers. So what we have is a limit right here, and it's preset at 1024, but it can go much higher. You need to make that decision. Another thing we have is device interrogation cycle time. What this means is essentially, as it's showing, you can only query that device every 5 minutes. The ARP tables are likely not to change much in 5 minutes, if at all. So you need to make a decision how many minutes you're going to take between querying it. So if you map a switch and then map it again, within 5 minutes it will skip going and talking to this server router 1 or server router 2, depending on the settings that you have right here. With whatever SNMP devices you choose to query for their ARP tables, you need to be careful that those SNMP devices have visibility into the part of the network that your switch is covering. Otherwise, it's just a waste of bandwidth. So choose them carefully. One last source of ARP information that I want to cover is the static ARP table. First of all, you can put an ARP table entry in by hand. This is a static entry. You just enter the MAC address and the IP address. It's kind of labor intensive to do it that way, so we have another way of doing it using an ARP table text file. Each entry is tab separated, MAC address followed by an IP version 4 address on a single line. What you do is, if you happen to be in an enterprise where you have many static IPs such as printers or servers, even workstations for that matter, what you can do is create this ARP table in a text file, and then you can import it in here and it'll become static. By static, we mean that it shows up over here as static, but when we query the ARP table using the MAC address looking for the IP address, we find it. And also, under global settings, the dynamic entries, which are not static, are normally erased on exit. And you can also erase the static entries by checking this box, but normally we leave that unchecked. That is the default. So that pretty much wraps up how ARP table entries are gathered and how they are used in the Managed Switch Port Mapping tool.